Hello, I'm Scott Alsop. I'm a history teacher who's been delivering the Cambridge IGCSE course for quite a few years, and in this video I'm going to share my top tips for Paper 4, the alternative to coursework. This year the Cambridge IGCSE has changed the structure of Paper 4. Since this year is the first time that the paper will be sat, there's really not very much guidance from the exam board and even less practice papers for you to try. But I've been actively teaching the course and have attended some training sessions on the changes to the syllabus. So I've put together this video which I hope will give you some useful practical tips and tricks on how you can use your knowledge and your skills in the right ways in order to gain the number of marks that you deserve on Paper 4. Now, IGCSE History Paper 4 for Cambridge is based on the depth study. And consequently, the content material differs depending on which depth study you studied at your school. Now, most centres do seem to do depth study about Germany, with the USA and Russia also proving popular. But the layout of the exam and the requirements of the mark scheme are the same for each particular depth study. So I'm going to try to be as broad as possible. So then, what are you expected to do? Well, by now you should be comfortable with the idea of exam questions being marked according to specific level criteria. The examiner reads your response and then they fit what you've said into what are referred to as level descriptors. These are very generic descriptions of what students might do in their work, and they're structured like a ladder of attainment. The better your answer, the higher the level you receive. Now, Paper 4 is marked out of 40 marks across two questions, one worth 15 marks and one worth 25, and each question has its own level descriptors and therefore its own specific requirements. The 15-mark question has 3 levels, while the 25-mark question has 5. The examiner's role is to identify the level descriptor that best fits your work and then choose how well your work does what the descriptor says. The better you do it, the higher the mark you get. So really, I can't emphasize enough the importance of your teacher sharing these generic level descriptors with you, because they give really clear instructions on what to do to secure the best marks. You can see it almost as a kind of a tick list of things to do. Now, the purpose of Paper 4 overall is to test your ability to meet 2 assessment objectives. In the first question, the examiner wants to see how well you can recall, select, organise and deploy detailed and specific knowledge of your chosen depth study. Then in the second question, the Part B, they want you to construct an historical explanation using contextual knowledge of the topic. Now, in many cases, they want you in Part B to explain why a particular person, event or policy was historically important. Now, this possibly sounds a bit scary, but the reality is that you should be doing this anyway, because at its core, you can really see Paper 4 as just being like an extended version of the question types that you're already used to from Paper 1. So let's get to the paper. When you open the paper, you're going to be faced with a number of different depth studies. Obviously, you should only look at the topic that you've studied. Within your topic, you'll then find 2 questions, which each contain a Part A and a Part B. You need to choose one question to answer, but your answer must include both Parts A and B of your chosen question. So, the first thing that you need to do then is to spend a bit of time choosing which of the 2 questions you want to answer. I know that seems really obvious, but with Paper 4 being worth around a third of your total IGCSE grade across just 2 questions, you really do need to choose wisely. So make sure you read the questions closely, focus on the specific terms included in the text, and keep an eye on the dates. Some of the questions give a specific time frame, such as, say, the 1920s or after 1934. So you've got to make sure that all of your examples are drawn from that exact period. Anything outside those dates is irrelevant and it doesn't gain you any marks. So what we're going to do now is to look at each question type in turn, beginning with Part A, that's worth 15 marks. The question will ask you to write an account of something related to your depth study. For the Germany topic, the specimen paper provided by the exam board gives 2 example questions. The first is write an account of the establishment of the Weimar Republic. The second is write an account of Hitler's consolidation of power, 1933 to 34. So what's an account? Well, an account is a retelling of the story. The examiner just wants you to describe in detail what happened and in a logical way. So according to the mark scheme, this means that you have to focus closely on the question topic and include the main events and developments. Basically, don't get distracted by things that aren't relevant. You then need to include precise and accurate historical knowledge and details. A quick check is, are you including things with capital letters, in which case it's probably a person or a place, and are you including numbers, in which case you're probably giving statistics or dates. And finally, you need to sequence your account logically. What the examiner wants you to do in your retelling of the story is to name the key characters and the organisations and the features and say what they did. You don't need to present an overall judgment. This isn't asking you to provide any balance. And also, there's no explanation. You just describe what happened in detail. There are exemplar answers available for this that are freely available on the Cambridge website, but for copyright reasons I can't include them here. But you can go off and look for those. And if you do read them, you'll see that you really do need to write at least 3 short paragraphs about key parts of the story. I'd suggest that you start each paragraph with a clearly indicated part of the story, and if it's your second paragraph or later, try to show how that next bit leads on from the previous thing that happened. And then, of course, remember to pack each paragraph with lots of specific names, statistics, and other details that show that you really know the story. If you want to see an example of an historical account, check out my other YouTube channel. It's called History Pod, and on that I take an event from a day in history and I write a 300-ish word account of what happened, and then I narrate it. So in 2.5 minutes I tell the story of an historical event. That's basically what you're trying to do in Part A of Paper 4 on the CIE exam. On to Part B then. The second part of the question, which is worth 25 marks. Now, these questions do appear to be worded in a few different ways, but the requirement in the answer is the same. They all use the same mark scheme. What you need to do is to take one factor of an event and consider a range of different ways in which it affected something else. So it could say, discuss the extent to which this was a turning point within a period, or discuss the importance or the impact or the contribution of a named factor within the period of your depth study. For example, within the Germany topic, the specimen paper offers discuss the impact of the Treaty of Versailles on Germany, and a second example of discuss the importance of the Night of the Long Knives. So although these questions appear to be different, one asks about the impact and the other asks about the importance, they're really asking you just to focus on explaining the effects or the consequences of the named factor. Now, within the study of history, we often see how one event has multiple consequences. It's a causal web. For large events, such as the impact of the Treaty of Versailles on Germany, you might consider the political consequences or effects, or the social consequences, or the economic consequences. Other named events may be much more specific, and so have much more precise consequences. In the case of the Night of the Long Knives, for example, well, that had some very specific effects. Some of them were short-term, some were long-term. Some were really specific to the Nazi Party, some had a wider impact on Germany as a whole. The purpose of the 25-mark question is to get you to explain a range of effects or consequences of a single named factor. Now, in the mark scheme, the exam board calls these different aspects facets. These are kind of particular aspects of something that's much bigger. So some of the different facets of the Treaty of Versailles' impact on Germany may include its impact on politics, its impact on society, and its impact on the economy. Each of the facets that you include then needs to be fully analysed. This means that you need to not only provide detailed and specific evidence about the factor in the question, but also explain the importance of each of them. This won't be a balanced essay in the sense of it being a two-sided argument, but it does need to consider multiple aspects, multiple angles, multiple facets. You're actually quite used to doing this from the 6-mark questions on paper 1, where you identify and explain causes of an event. The 25-mark question on paper 4 is asking you to actually do something very similar, just to think about the different ways that the named factor affected something else. Therefore, while the Part A account is descriptive, the Part B needs you to be analytical. Remember that Part B is a question about how a factor relates to something else, and so you need to clearly explain how or why each facet that you include was significant to the topic being explored. So if you're answering a question about, say, the importance of Lenin in the years 1917 to 24, you obviously need to give a range of examples of what Lenin did. Similarly, if you're talking about the importance of the rise of popular culture in America during the 1920s, you need to think about the different aspects of that. But to properly answer the question, you need to show the impact that these things had. Part B is not just saying what happened, it's about explaining why it mattered. Now, if you use the point evidence explanation paragraph format or something similar to that that helps you to structure your work, you're probably already very used to writing analytical responses like this, but it doesn't hurt for me to state this again. You must ensure that every point you make refers back to the exact wording of the question. Don't just tell the examiner the facts, make those facts relevant to the question. Examiners often report back on analytical questions that some IGCSE students just provide generalised comments that don't address the issue in the question. So if the question asks you to discuss the importance of the Great Depression for Germany, your explanation probably needs to include something along the lines of, "This was important for Germany because." Now, following this format of at least 3 facets, supported with good evidence and explained to say why they were important, will get you a good mark, but it won't secure you the highest level. To push for the top marks on Part B, there's therefore a little extra to do. So while each of the named factors that we've considered did have a range of effects, a range of facets, it goes without saying that some effects or facets were bigger or more important than others. Evaluating this relative impact or importance of the different facets that you include helps to move your answer into the highest level on the mark scheme. The mark scheme describes this as reaches a clear, convincing and substantiated judgment on relative importance. And it's this concept of relative importance which is where you explain that although the stated factor did of course have a range of effects and consequences, the biggest and most important of those effects and consequences was this one. For the impact of the Treaty of Versailles on Germany, for example, you might choose to argue that although, yes, it had an impact on the political situation in Germany and it had an impact on the social situation in Germany, the Treaty of Versailles' economic impact on Germany was the most important, the most significant, the most impactful. To help you reach that kind of judgment, it can help to consider issues such as how long a facet lasted for, how many people it affected, and whether the effect ever really went away. Demonstrating that you understand that events have multiple effects, but that some of these effects are more or less significant than others, is what will help you reach the highest levels. So, that's paper 4. Let's summarise what you should expect to see. Firstly, you'll have a choice of 2 questions from your depth study. Each question contains two parts, part A and B, so select your question carefully. Ensure that you have a detailed knowledge of the specific terms and also that you know and understand the time frame that's stated in the question. Remember that in part A, you're writing an account of an event. This is telling the story of what happened through at least 3 individual aspects. You need to include lots of specific details and you need to order your account logically so that one part flows to the next. What about part B then? Well, this is where you're required to present a multifaceted or multi-factor explanation of an event or a person. The questions usually look at the impact or the importance or the contribution that one event or person made to something else. This requires you to think of at least 3 different ways that that given factor affected other things and explain them with detailed supporting evidence. To get the highest marks, you also need to consider which of the things that you've written about was most significant. Now in part B, it can be worth writing an introduction that says what you're going to argue. You'd outline the facets that you plan to discuss and importantly, say at this stage in the introduction which one you think was most significant. We call this a thesis statement. It tells the examiner what you're going to argue. And for the sake of the mark scheme, it also shows that you're already reaching a judgment on which one was most impactful. For both parts of the answer though, both A and B, you need to make sure that every point you make uses specific and detailed evidence. You need to use paragraphs as well to properly structure your work. But ultimately, as I said a bit earlier, at its core, you could really see paper 4 as being kind of an extended version of question types that you're already used to from paper 1. It really isn't anything to be scared of, but you must ensure that you gear your answers to the specific demands of each of parts A and B, because they do require you to do very different things. While both obviously need a good structure and lots of evidence, part A is about you telling a good detailed story or account, while part B needs you to explain every point that you make with direct reference to the question and choose which of those effects was the most significant. I hope that's useful. Good luck.